After telling them to go back, Western Europeans are now asking Eastern Europeans to come back. For the second time since leaving their home countries and Central and Eastern Europe, migrants are packing up to leave once again. This time, however, they're moving back to where they came from, a strong stance Brexit supporters took on during the 2016 referendum. They're not just moving back because Brexit forced them to. In fact, many migrants are moving back home because they want to. Between the day they came to the West for a better life to then move back to the East for, ironically, a better life, what changed? And how is that impacting Europe's labour market? What makes free movement ideal for the EU 27? When the people of the United Kingdom voted to withdraw membership from the European Union, they did so out of fear of total EU integration. That is, the EU was on a mission to eliminate barriers between countries in Europe by way of creating a single solitary unit. At least that's how it appeared to Brexit supporters. The EU was trying to establish a seamless flow, be it in trade, communications, or travel from one EU nation to another. Whether it was trying to infringe upon the autonomy of any of its member states remains a wholly contested topic of debate. In any case, several of the EU's measures were meant to give EU states certain privileges, such as the right to travel from one member state to another. At the heart of it, the free movement was created to give people opportunities they couldn't readily seek in their home nations. Taking Poland as an example here, the Polish diaspora is amongst the highest seen anywhere in the world. It peaked somewhere in the early 2000s, with Poles moving outside of Poland to find ways to support their families back home if they couldn't take them abroad themselves. Polish communities exist in every corner of the globe, but there's a sizable Polish community in the United Kingdom. The community expanded exponentially after Poland was allowed membership within the EU back in 2004. This allowed them the right to freely travel to the United Kingdom or to any other EU member state and enjoy benefits that mirrored the local population's benefits. But why specifically the United Kingdom? Freedom of movement, once known as freedom of movement of workers, bases its history on the 1951 Treaty of Paris, which allowed the free movement of steel and coal workers after the establishment of the European Coal and Steel Community. This was eventually expanded upon again and again until defined in clear terms in the 1992 Treaty of Maastricht, aka the foundation of the European Union. The treaty rules that every person holding the nationality of a member state shall be a citizen of the Union. Freedom of movement was, therefore, integrated into the very foundation of the Union, and over the years several nationalities benefited from this. But things were different when it came time for Poles to reap its benefits just the same. Why? The greater goal for Poland had always been to reintegrate itself into Europe, especially after the fall of communism in 1989. The process of re-entering, however, was long and tedious. Industries in Poland had largely remained stagnant amid the communist regime, whereas most of Europe had moved on. By the time Poland freed itself from communism, it was several years behind. This kick-started a movement to rebuild its industries, one that was marred by difficulties because of Poland's troubled political situation. To put it more bluntly, Poland has consistently been ranked toward the lower end in corruption indexes, although notably the situation has been improving. The pushback Poland received when it applied for membership of the EU, however, didn't have much to do with its law and order situation and how that could impact the EU's global image. If anything, it was because Poles who'd been suffering in Poland would naturally want to move out to find a better life elsewhere. This isn't a cynical rhetoric. Once Poland was granted membership, several EU member states imposed restrictions that would hinder the everyday Pole's ability to live anywhere outside of Poland. Germany and Austria imposed some of the strictest restrictions, initially barring Polish workers from accessing their labour markets altogether. They were concerned about the proximity of Poland and the potential for large numbers of workers to migrate. France opted for a more restrictive approach, requiring Polish workers to secure work permits for specific industries, which limited their ability to work freely. It's worth noting here that the Polish plumber stereotype originated from flyers that were circulated in France. In 2004, French politicians actively campaigned against the Bolkestein Directive, claiming that it would result in an influx of Polish plumbers or Estonian architects. A quick refresher here. The Bolkestein Directive, formerly known as the Services in the Internal Marketing Directive, is an EU law aimed at facilitating the free movement of services across member states. Proposed by Dutch Commissioner Frits Bolkestein, it sought to remove regulatory barriers for businesses operating in multiple countries, promoting competition and economic growth. One key provision, the country of origin principle, allowed service providers to follow their home country's regulations rather than those of the host country. This sparked controversy as critics feared it would lead to social dumping and lower labour standards. The directive was modified and adopted in 2006. Anyway, the United Kingdom, Ireland and Sweden chose not to impose restrictions, allowing Polish workers immediate access to their labour markets. Italy and Spain were initially hesitant, but lifted all regulations within a few years. Per the EU directive, they could have kept the restrictions in place for 7 years. As of 2024, no country in the EU can withhold freedom of movement from the Poles. That being said, let's circle back to the original question. Why the UK? It's important to remember that the concept of the Polish plumber, more so what it represented, was popularized at 3 separate times in 3 separate nations. We already talked about the negative connotations attached to it in France, but the Swiss Socialist Party campaigned in favor of the free circulation of people and also featured a character with the slogan, "Plumbers of all countries unite." It is worth noting, however, that Switzerland is not a member of the EU, and the comments were made in reference to bilateral European deals. The third time it was referenced was in 2016 during the Brexit referendum. Then Brexit supporters claimed that the free movement had completely dismantled the UK's economy. Perhaps a stretch, but supporters argued that Poles had moved to the UK in such astronomical numbers that it had become impossible for the UK to sustain the mass migration. To give them some credit, Poles had moved to the UK at an unprecedented time. According to the 2021-2022 consensus, Poles were the second largest foreign-born majority in the UK, with 841,000 Poles documented, second only to Indians, who outnumbered them at around 965,000. There is a key difference to note here. Per the same census, Poles or collectively EU migrants had moved to the UK seeking work. 42% of them did, in any case. That was the major determination for them. On the other hand, non-EU members who'd moved to the UK were motivated largely by family ties. The census reported that 48% of non-EU nationalities had moved to the UK to stay close to family. Since we're only focused on Poles here, we'll expand upon them. They were in the UK to work, which by all accounts shouldn't come off as a bad thing, right? However, for Brexit supporters, the people who'd moved from Poland to the UK were dismantling its economy by taking away jobs from well-meaning British citizens who would now have to stay home, unemployed and unable to sustain themselves. There was another rhetoric that suggested that Poles, or anyone who made use of EU's free movement, would enter the United Kingdom, live there and reap the benefits of its welfare system. In any case, they wanted it to end, and the only way to do it was to withdraw membership from the EU. When the results of the 2016 referendum were read, the UK announced it would begin steps to withdraw from the Union. By 2020, they achieved just that, and Poles began to move back. But did Britain just shoot itself in the foot? Once the transitional period ended in December 2020, Britain was officially out of the European Union and ceased to oblige by its rules, including the free movement. Those who'd retained and were accepted the right to remain or were in the process of it could stay, and those who didn't or were rejected were treated as any other expats living in the UK. But this is what they wanted, or at least a considerable majority of Brits wanted. After all, Eastern migration had destroyed the UK's economy and job market, right? Ending the free movement would allow people in the UK to get back the jobs that Eastern migrants had essentially stolen from them. But that wasn't the case. In 2022, the ONS reported that 13.3% of businesses were experiencing a labour shortage. The percentage of businesses experiencing a shortage of workers had been between 12.9% and 15.4% since October 21, especially in August of 2022, when 16.8% of businesses reported a shortage. The industries with the highest percentage of businesses experiencing worker shortages in November 2022 were accommodation and food services at 35.5% and construction at 20.7%. A September 2021 ONS article provided statistics on how many companies cited a lack of EU applicants specifically as a reason why they were unable to fill vacancies. Almost half of businesses in the transport and storage sector, 46%, cited this, as did over a third of businesses in administration at 40%, education at 39%, and arts and recreation at 36%. Per their report, there was approximately 1.19 million vacancies in the UK concurrent to the number of unemployed people in the UK. The question becomes, why weren't those seeking employment seeking it in the industries that were facing shortages? The answer isn't as one-dimensional as you might think. It's not like anyone could just go and work construction if they don't have relevant experience. You would need the appropriate skills to apply and to be accepted for a position. However, it wasn't like many of these sectors had labour shortages specifically in top-ranking positions. Surely they were more focused on filling the labour shortages than anything else, right? Again, the answer isn't one-dimensional. Yes, people could still apply, and there'd be a high chance that they'd be accepted into those positions, say in the food and services industry, which typically doesn't require a great deal of skill in entry-level positions. But then again, there was another problem here. The high cost of living was contrasted by the low wages being offered. It's important to remember that the UK is facing a cost of living crisis, which means that household spending went up and savings went down. During this time, everyone was focused on getting better paying jobs. This is evidenced best by the Pick for Britain campaign, which was initiated to prove a point. That is, Britain could do just fine for itself in a post-Brexit workforce because Brits themselves would take up the work. You have to remember that agricultural roles were usually taken up by Eastern migrants. The Pick for Britain campaign was, however, a tremendous failure when Brits failed to show up to, well, Pick for Britain. Speaking of Europe in its entirety, the continent is currently facing an odd labour shortage, as in there are some sectors that are struggling to find a meaningful workforce and some skilled professionals who are struggling to find meaningful employment. Europe is concurrently facing a labour shortage and a surplus of skilled workers. To better understand this, let's talk about how Sir Keir Starmer plans to address the labour issue, the points-based system. The Prime Minister plans to both reduce the number of migrants coming into the country as well as fill the labour shortage by allowing skilled migrants into shortage sectors. As of 2024, that sector would be the engineering sector. Starmer's broader plan includes leveraging the skilled migrants' expertise and having them train Brits. Eventually, the labour shortage would be filled by skilled Brits themselves. But that's a long time from now, and we're talking about the present. Europe needs people, but its own people cannot fill the gap. More specifically, Western Europe requires workers. Traditionally, they'd look towards Central or Eastern Europeans, Polish plumbers or otherwise, to come and fill the labour shortages. But things have changed, and it's a change West Europe didn't account for. We started this video off by talking about the Polish diaspora and how it's one of the largest diasporas in the world, right? We also discussed at length how the primary reason stated for Poles for moving out of Poland was to seek a better life by way of better employment elsewhere, correct? Lastly, we also discussed how Poland had been on a mission to improve its economy following a fall of the Soviet Union. Well, interestingly, the countries that were once struggling to keep up are veering closer and closer to their goal. While it'd be an over-exaggeration that Eastern Europe is now at par with Western Europe's economy, it's also an exaggeration that Eastern Europeans are still reliant on the West for a better quality of life. Take Poland as an example. Warsaw is seeing a dramatic change that many didn't account for. As the country tries to build up its economy to modern standards, it's looking at Poles to fill the labour shortage. Poles have always been one to respond whenever an opportunity comes up, and what could have been a better opportunity than one right at home? What West Europe didn't account for was the fact that East Europe, by way of its modernisation attempts, would create a job market so large that locals would have to stay. Meanwhile, people in Western Europe are facing labour shortages. One reason would be the fact that Eastern Europeans are not reliant on them anymore. And then there are a few other reasons too. For starters, almost every sector within the European economy is undergoing digital transformations. New technologies designed to boost output, reduce human error, and make processes more efficient are being introduced across the board. However, many of these cutting-edge technologies require a certain set of skills, which creates the need for employers to retrain and upskill staff. In 2022, approximately 21% of the EU population was aged 65 or older, according to the European Commission, with half of the population over the age of 44. This demographic trend has led to a declining working population projected to fall from 265 million in 2022 to 258 million by 2030. The ongoing energy transition and development of clean energy technologies are reshaping the job market, creating opportunities in some sectors while eliminating roles in others. For instance, Solar Power Europe reported that the solar energy workforce expanded by 39% in 2022, growing from 466,000 workers in 2021 to 648,000 by the end of 2022. Although earlier projections anticipated 1 million solar jobs by 2030, current trends suggest this milestone could be reached as early as 2025. Conversely, the coal industry faces significant job losses as reliance on fossil fuels declines. Labour market challenges are not limited to energy transitions. Working conditions in some EU countries, including Greece, Spain and France, worsened in 2021 according to the European Trade Union's EU Job Quality Index. Poor job satisfaction has driven professional migration. For example, the Irish Nurses and Midwives Organisation, or INMO for short, revealed that nearly 75% of intern nurses and midwives considered leaving Ireland upon qualification, citing poor working conditions and wages that fail to match the high cost of living. Staff shortages are a growing concern across the EU, particularly in healthcare, software, construction and engineering. These shortages reflect broader demographic and economic challenges, highlighting the need for strategies to attract and retain talent while adapting to shifting labour market demands. In 2022, the European Commission reported that 21% of the EU population was aged 65 or older, with half of the population over 44. This aging trend has led to a shrinking workforce projected to decline from 265 million in 2022 to 258 million by 2030. Simultaneously, the energy transition is reshaping job markets, creating opportunities in clean energy while phasing out traditional industries like coal. Solar Power Europe, for instance, reported a 39% rise in the solar energy workforce in 2022 from 466,000 to 648,000 workers. Solar job growth, initially expected to reach 1 million by 2030, may now achieve this milestone by 2025. Conversely, coal-dependent regions face job losses as fossil fuel reliance diminishes. Labour challenges extend beyond energy. In Greece, Spain and France, working conditions declined in 2021 as reported by the European Trade Union's EU Job Quality Index. Declining job satisfaction and cost of living pressures have spurred professional migration. For example, 75% of Ireland's intern nurses and midwives considered emigrating after citing inadequate wages and poor working conditions. Staff shortages now plague healthcare, software, construction, and engineering sectors across the EU. Historically, the European Commission has effectively addressed similar challenges by fostering cross-sectoral collaboration and forward-thinking policies. To counter labour imbalances, the EU introduced the Pact for Skills, an initiative helping public and private organisations adapt to green and digital transitions. The Pact offers resources like workshops, webinars, and access to funding opportunities. In 2023, the Commission launched the Skills and Talent Mobility Package, aimed at attracting non-EU talent and addressing labour shortages by simplifying qualification recognition and enhancing student and workforce mobility. Will these measures be enough to stabilise the labour market and address the labour shortage?